Report with Sam Seder, where every day's Casual Friday. That means Monday is Casual Monday, Tuesday, Casual Tuesday, Wednesday, Casual Hump Day, Thursday, Casual Thurs, that's what we call it, and Friday, Casual Shabbat. The Majority Report with Sam Seder.
It is Friday, September 29th, 2017. My name is Sam Seder. This is the four-time award-winning Majority Report. We are broadcasting live steps from the industrially ravaged Gowanus Canal in the heartland of America, downtown Brooklyn, USA. On the program today, it's Casual Friday. Joining us to look back on the week that was Digby from the blog Hullabaloo, otherwise known as Heather Parton. Not the blog, the person. And to, well, I have a sense of what he would suggest we watch this weekend. But the President of the United States.
The real president.
Not the real president. Anthony Atamanuik will be here. He is the star of the President Show. What is it? The star, the lead? He's the guy who plays Donald Trump. We're gonna get inside Donald Trump. It's Donald Trump Malaise Day here at the Majority Report, as Puerto Rico's pleas for help finally heard. But why is it taking so long? In the case of millions of children who are about to lose their health insurance, their pleas seem to be ignored. Republicans setting out to cut taxes for the rich. Will Trump function to hold the Dems together on this one? Tom Price pledges to screw taxpayers as more cabinet officials revealed their lifestyle of the rich and famous. Cabinet secretary members. ICE is attacking sanctuary cities. All this and more, ladies and gentlemen, on this Casual Friday of Fridays. First off, let me just say we have a birthday request for a longtime listener of this program back when it was on Air America. So listener Lauren, tomorrow is her birthday, and as traditional, on the end of Yom Kippur, which is tomorrow. Tonight is Kol Nidre. Does any of this mean anything to you, Matt? Have you even heard these words before?
I think some of them made it to like the Rugrats television show, which is my main exposure to Judaism.
I mean, I was saying Yom Kippur, and I'm just looking at you, and I don't think I've ever seen you have more of a blank face.
I've heard some of the words. I just don't. Yeah, I just can't assign meaning to them.
You had a total blank face on your. Like, I don't think I've ever seen that look. That reminded me of when my dog had a stroke, and I saw it. And it was like, wow, holy crap. When your dog has a stroke, I mean, first of all, it was incredibly disturbing. I mean, I think I was 15 and he was probably 12, or maybe I was 18 and he was 15. I mean, I was really close to him. And I saw him have a stroke. And the look in his eyes, I realized, like, the amount of personality that's there when he's not having a stroke that I see in his eyes. Because in his eyes, it looked completely vacant. And now he recovered, and I think you will too. But the look in your eyes when I said Yom Kippur, I don't think I'd ever seen that before. It looked like your whole life force had left your body. So, anyways, it's also Lauren's birthday tomorrow, so I will blow the shofar both for her birthday and to anticipate the end of Yom Kippur, I will be heading north to Massachusetts, where I often will go for important holidays. Just as the Bible tells us, head to Worcester on Yom Kippur. Michael is out today. I have no idea where he is or why he's gone, but apparently yesterday he had a cold. Today, it's Friday. It's the final Friday of the month, so why not take it off? I guess that's the. He's really beginning to really freelance on some of these sort of work commitments.
I just figured it was some holiday I didn't know about.
Yeah, no, he celebrates. I don't know. Maybe it's a totally different calendar. I'm going to talk to Digby about this in a bit, but I got an email. I mean, one of the big stories that people are starting to realize about what's going on in Puerto Rico is there seemed to be no sense that there was going to have to be a major response to this hurricane. Now, remember, the hurricane hit last weekend. Maybe was it on Friday or Saturday? And it was quite clear this was going to be a devastating hurricane. I mean, there certainly was significant advance notice that this was going to be devastating for Puerto Rico. Maybe it was 12 hours, maybe it was 24 hours, but Hurricane Maria was a Category 4 or 5, and it was headed directly for Puerto Rico. And there are now people, military personnel in particular, who are coming out and saying after an earthquake shattered Haiti's capital on January 12, 2010, the U.S. military mobilized as if it was going to war. Before dawn the next morning, an Army unit was airborne on its way to seize control of the main airport in Port-au-Prince. Within 2 days, the Pentagon had 8,000 troops, American troops en route. Within 2 weeks, 33 U.S. military ships and 22,000 troops had arrived. More than 300 military helicopters buzzed overhead. By contrast, 8 days after Hurricane Maria ripped across neighboring Puerto Rico, just 4,400 service members were participating in federal operations to assist the devastated island. This is according to an Army general. In addition, about 1,000 Coast Guard members were aiding the efforts. 40 U.S. military copters were helping deliver food and water to 3.4 million residents of the U.S. territory, along with 10 Coast Guard helicopters. Here is Lieutenant General Russell Honore. He was the commander of the Hurricane Katrina response. Here is his reaction to how long it's taken to mobilize the military in this instance.
Storm, just like we did in Florida. Florida was a textbook operation. General Calhoun put his guard in. The federal troops came in by sea and by air, and it was a textbook operation. It was a difficult operation. We needed even more than that. Scale up, Wolf. They need to scale up in Puerto Rico. In Katrina, I had 20,000 federal troops, not federal workers, federal troops. I had 20 ships and over 240 helicopters. And Puerto Rico is bigger than Katrina. And if somebody from the Pentagon want to call me or from Northern Command, call me. I'll give you the damn numbers because they're in the after-action report and the lessons learned. It doesn't look like we learned anything. We are slow. The issue with the United States is we always do the right thing, but we do it slow and late. And right now, the people of Puerto Rico are going to pay that bill.
Now, there's some who argue that the response to Haiti was quicker because you didn't have issues like posse comitatus, which complicates putting military personnel on the ground. Now, but we put some on the ground. We just haven't put that many. I'm quite sure posse comitatus doesn't kick in after like 2,000 troops. But that's the story that you're going to hear. You're going to hear Puerto Rican officials blamed for this. But, you know, this is something that we saw coming, or the U.S. government did. The Army has taken over recovery operations in Puerto Rico as of yesterday afternoon. But I got a text from a buddy of mine who was a Navy seaman in the early 90s. And he wrote me, he goes, in 1992, the ship I was on delivered aid to Kauai after the Hurricane Iniki. Apparently, Iniki was one of the most powerful hurricanes to hit any part of the United States. I was on an LHA that loaded before the storm. I don't know what an LHA is. We were delivering supplies in 300 porta potties less than 12 hours after that storm. We worked basically nonstop for a week after being recalled for full crew off of Liberty. And he says, first military ship expects to arrive in 4 days from Puerto Rico, 2 weeks after the storm. He says, of course, back then, Hawaii was part of the United States. He's being a little sarcastic there. But the response to this Puerto Rican natural catastrophe has been particularly slow. And to the extent that we're seeing the response that we're seeing now, it's only after a significant amount of outcry. And this is simply a function, people have said, the Haiti response was much quicker. But of course, it's apples to oranges, because I think, to be fair, if Donald Trump was the president when Haiti was struck, I imagine he would also not give two craps. But, I mean, this is, you want another example of white supremacy. I mean, this is what, when people say, like, white supremacy shows it's, and this isn't a function of Donald Trump going like, I'm not going to, they're brown, I don't care about them. I don't think he ever articulates that. I think it just doesn't hit his radar in the same way. And I think that's true probably of a lot of people. There's other factors, granted. It's not the continental United States. You had media had a tough time getting down there early and sending pictures back. But nevertheless, I mean, to think that some disregard of Puerto Rican lives is not a function of, particularly in this day and age, of them not being pure Americans, civic nationalists, whatever the vernacular is, the euphemism, I think is pretty naive. All right, we're going to take a quick break. When we come back, we'll talk about this more with Digby as we look back on the rest of the week. We'll be right back after this.
You used to still believe it's worth the fight. I could make it all go away. Tell me what you're thinking, don't delay. We could still be having some sweet memories. This heart's
We are back. Sam Seder on the Majority Report. Just a reminder, folks, your support makes this show possible. You can become a member today at jointhemajorityreport.com. It is my pleasure to welcome back to the program the proprietor of my favorite Uber blog, Hullabaloo. It's only taken me a decade to get that name, to be able to pronounce that blog's name. But Heather Digby Parton is here with us. Hi, Heather.
Hey, Sam. How are you?
I'm doing, well. We spoke this week on Ring of Fire and talked about our Trump malaise, and maybe we'll get into that. But I was just talking about there seems to be an awareness that our response to Puerto Rico, the hurricane that hit there, was lagging, was late and minimal, and that it's only now it's just starting to ramp up, and there's a lot of reasons for this, but I guess the question is will this stick to Donald Trump?
Well, that's what I don't know. I mean, I was writing about this, last weekend when the whole NFL controversy was happening, and not to say that wasn't a topic worth exploring, because it obviously is. But it's one that Trump sort of ginned up on his own. Those protests had been happening for a long time, and Trump decided to go to Alabama on Friday night a week ago and just, turn it into a national controversy, a big national crisis, sort of out of the blue. At the same time that what was happening in Puerto Rico was starting to unfold then. I mean, it was pretty clear. We knew that it had been hit with a massive hurricane on top of one that had just hit it previously, because it was hit by Irma too. And Trump wasn't talking about it. Trump wasn't saying anything. And the first tweet that he put out, I mean, I think a staffer put out something like, Puerto Rico's in our thoughts or something when it was hitting. But the first tweet that Trump himself put out mentioned that, the island was already, basically said, the island was a mess anyway. It's filled with debt and we've got to do something about it. Sad. That was about the extent of his concern. And it was clear, even at that time, and I'm talking about last Sunday maybe, that something very, very serious was happening in Puerto Rico. I mean, the news reports were starting to filter out, and as you pointed out earlier, the entire power grid went down, the communications were down, everything was. So it was even hard for the media to kind of wrap their arms around the extent of the crisis. But by that time, by the end of the weekend, it was pretty clear. And I was writing for Salon, for Monday morning about, wait a minute, what is going on here? You got the president, obsessing over this NFL thing at a time when we have got a major humanitarian crisis that affects millions of humans, not to mention the fact that they're also Americans, something which, by the way, Trump has never acknowledged publicly, that we're talking about Americans here. You can ask yourself why he might be, well, maybe he doesn't know, but I kind of doubt it by this time, and he's still not mentioning it, that these are Americans. So, this response compared to what happened with Katrina, which I also wrote about this week, when you look back at, the norm that was exploded with Katrina, I mean, the fact that Bush was, I mean, we all remember this, he was photographed taking a picture with a birthday cake with John McCain as the levees were overflowing. He was pictured flying over the devastation and kind of looking down on it. And the response, obviously, was very, very slow. And we all watched it unfold on TV. And then he went down to the disaster area, and he said to his FEMA guy, you're doing a heck of a job. Brownie, you're doing a heck of a job. And that's when the whole thing exploded. It was just outrageous. Well, Trump, meanwhile, and this is him, from the first moment when he started talking about the Puerto Rico crisis, which I think was on Tuesday, when he had that sort of brief Q&A with the Spanish Prime Minister, all he's been saying is heck of a job, Trumpy, over and over and over again. we're doing a great job. Everyone's saying we're doing a great job. They couldn't be more happy with what we're doing. I am the greatest. This has been the most fabulous response we've ever seen. It's amazing. It's beautiful. It's wonderful. Over and over and over again. Now, Bush was vilified for a heck of a job, Brownie. I mean, that was really kind of the beginning of the end. That was in 2005. He'd just been reelected, 9 months before it happened. And that was kind of the beginning of the end for Bush, was his, lackadaisical attitude toward American citizens who were drowning in front of our, on our TV, and kind of acting as though everything was fine when it wasn't. And that was a tremendous criticism of the government under Bush and the attitude that he has. Now, maybe that will happen with Trump on this. It should. But, look at what he does, just generally speaking. I mean, will this stick? I honestly don't know, and I don't know how many people would have to die or what the crisis level has to be down there in Puerto Rico for this to stick to him, because from what I can tell, he's just carrying on talking about tax cuts for millionaires and, basically talking about how great it is. And even this morning, just before I came on, he had a speech for the National Association of Manufacturers in which he said that, Puerto Rico is really, we're going to have to talk about that debt and, how they're going to repay all this. So
I think my sense is none of this is going to stick to him, because his incompetence and all of this is already built into the cake for his critics. And there's nothing that is in any way, there's no pretending anything different about him. And I think his supporters largely are, I don't know if they ever hear this information. I mean, I honestly, I don't know if they have access to this information. I really, I'm beginning more and more in these type of situations. I think the same thing about the airplane stuff, that Trump's fans, the 30 some odd % that are supportive of him, I feel like their media consists of Fox News on the left end of the spectrum, and then Mark Levin on the other end of the spectrum, or Rush Limbaugh, or the radio, or WorldNet Daily, or Sinclair Media. I don't know. I would imagine it's quite possible, in fact, not difficult, to find millions of people who are like, sounds like things are going well in Puerto Rico. And that's why I don't know if this sticks to him, but I will say, I mean, it sure should, but I think all this is sort of baked into the cake with this guy.
Well, you may be right. I mean, it's the old saying, defining deviancy down. Well, this is defining incompetency down.
Yep.
It's with Trump, it whatever bar was previously set by any previous president is now just fallen completely to the ground. I mean, it's just, there is no bar really. We've been waiting for many months for whatever straw was going to break the camel's back. And everyone would wake up and go, oh, my God, and his approval ratings would tumble. I mean, you just have to look at what's happening, in order to see, when you look at the current polling among his fans, even the ones who admit that he's incompetent and that he, is inept and that he's unfit. I mean, the new Quinnipiac poll that came out this week, they literally had something like close to 70% of people saying that he's unfit for office. I mean, this is really unprecedented. But they support him anyway. I mean, they're still, Republicans too. I mean, look at what's happening in the Congress. Yep. You see Paul Ryan coming out. I think the president's doing, a really, he's doing a fine job. I mean, they have their motives for doing that, certainly. And his core supporters. And the media, I think, is still flailing a bit, although they're better than they have been in the past in some respects. But there's still a lot of flailing around, you see, in the mainstream media and trying to handle what Trump is doing. So I don't know if it will stick or not. But see, this is the problem. I mean, I think the assumption is that okay, so we have to go through this period. If we survive nuclear holocaust and some kind of economic disaster, and Trump will be out of office, and then we can go back to normal. I don't think that's actually the case. I think we need to be very, very worried about a bar that's being lowered like this. This is not an anomaly. This has been gradual. Look at what happened with Bush, right? I mean, and Iraq and everything that has been going on over the past 25 years, particularly with the Republican Party, and then, you and I can probably talk about the Democratic response to that. But this issue of the competence level of the government and the ability of Americans to kind of understand what's going on and react to it in a way that makes our democracy function. How do you bounce back from Donald Trump? I mean, this is a big question, and that's assuming that a lot of people are going to die in the interim, whether or not it's from Hurricane Maria or them sabotaging healthcare or whatever else they're doing. I mean, this is really a matter of life and death for many Americans. But in the long term, if you're just sort of trying to figure out how to sort of live through this moment and look to the other side when maybe Trump is no longer around, well, it's still the same party that put him there, and it's still the same group of people living in their little silo, right?
I think this is the thing. That there's not enough accountability for sort of both like a sort of personal and political accountability for the people who are enabling Trump, it seems to me. I mean, on one hand, look, it's clear that there is an apparatus that can deal with that is competent, largely probably still a function of what was put together during the Obama years, but can go down to Houston, and at the very least, I mean, obviously there's still a tremendous amount of devastation in that area from Harvey, but can address the immediate concerns. This, it seems to me, that this is not about competency as much as about will. He was distracted and decided it wasn't a problem. And where is the criticism of John Kelly? Like the guy who was supposed to be the adult watching the toddler who's got the rattle in his mouth. And we're all told that this guy runs a tight ship and he's one of the sane ones, supposedly. I never bought that because of his sort of draconian DHS stint. Yeah. But, I mean, this is what the establishment media will tell us. This is what, when I go on MSNBC sitting next to these never Trumpers, these former Republicans, they're all telling me this. Where is the accountability for that guy? Where's the accountability for the Republican Party that is, welcoming Roy Moore, who is, I mean, this guy wants to make gay people illegal. And Mike Pence sponsored a law over 10 years ago written by Roy Moore called the Constitution Restoration Act, I think it was, that said that judges should be removed if they don't acknowledge that our law comes from God. And it's like, there's no, Trump is such a massive blight, on our society. It's like this pestilence that is permeating everywhere that, people forget his candidate didn't win in Alabama. Roy Moore, there's every reason to believe that Roy Moore is going to win that election. But I don't know if, Marco Rubio would have appointed Jeff Sessions as Attorney General. But if Jeff Sessions gets hit by a bus and it's President Rubio, there's a good chance Roy Moore is going to win that election anyways. And you don't need Donald Trump for that. And there doesn't seem to be the level of urgency from the Democrats, from just sort of the media that that is holding these people to account. I mean, Mitch McConnell seems to be held more to account by the right than he is by the rest of the country.
Well, I mean, that's true. And think about this, Sam. I mean, what you point out is very true. We have, in the U.S. Senate and in the House of Representatives, the Republicans have a majority. They have a bunch of political leaders in there, people who are nationally known. I mean, I think people know who Paul Ryan is. He was the vice presidential candidate in 2012. Mitch McConnell, these are names that have some resonance. Now, the right wing hates those guys. And I'm not sure that they're ever going to be able to get that back. I mean, this loathing for the Republican leadership has been going on long before Trump. I mean, this isn't, Trump's he's actually riding on a bandwagon that existed in terms of the conservative movement and right-wing radio and all that, and they're loathing for those guys. I mean, this is a, kind of a weird right-wing pestilence of its own. But here's a chance for them. Let's just take Puerto Rico as an example. You could have a Republican leadership that takes this issue of just this is American citizens in Puerto Rico and the U.S. Virgin Islands, not to mention all the other islands out there in the Caribbean that have been devastated. We have a humanitarian disaster of epic proportions. Let's introduce bills and get those passed. And, go on TV and talk about this and send people down there and have, they can roll up their sleeves and speak Spanish and do whatever else. Be political leaders on this, right? I mean, they could do this and actually show themselves to be competent at something other than, either failure on their own terms, to, repeal Obamacare, if that's what they care about. They could cover all that up with some other behavior, or they could take a new tack altogether and decide to be responsible political leaders and try to do something in spite of this leader whom they obviously have no respect for, and he has no respect for them either. So they could take a different tack, but they're not doing it. They're out there, being toadies for Trump's tax plan and talking about, because this is really all they care about. This is,
right.
This is really their issue, is taxes, and they're scared of Rush Limbaugh, and they're scared of Steve Bannon, and they're scared of this, that, and the other. And so they're not, any accountability that you might expect to come from a group of very powerful political leaders. It's not like these people are potted plants. I mean, they have the power to actually do things. They're not doing it. So you got John Kelly, you got those people in the administration. They're obviously incompetent. Half of them are riding around on chartered jets at taxpayer expense to do God knows what. I don't know why these people have to travel so much. And then you've got the Congress, who basically, they spent as the Puerto Rican crisis was unfolding, they were running around wanking about a last-ditch effort to repeal Obamacare that had very little chance of passing, was completely ridiculous, and they spent all their time trying to get that thing done. So, this is a party-wide problem, a lack of leadership and vision. And in fact, they just seem to be kind of talking to each other, don't they? I mean, they're just kind of having this sort of circular discussion over and over and over again, and the rest of us are just watching.
Did you read that Ryan Grimm story about Lindsey Graham basically said, I don't know how I got in charge of healthcare. I'm a foreign policy guy, and but I figured nobody else was doing it, and then I really learned a lot as this went along, but I really had no idea what I was doing. And you start to realize, I've been following politics professionally now for 15 years almost. And I still, the ability for me to be amazed at the sort of the level of superficiality, nobody, it seems, knew what they were talking about within the Republican Party about healthcare. I'm not saying this as from an ideological standpoint. They just didn't do their homework. None of them. And they were all seeming to look around going okay, who's the expert on healthcare here? And there turned out there wasn't one. So they just sort of said, well, you're a doctor, or you were a doctor, which is I don't know, hey, you watch television. Why don't you come in here and live direct this this episode of Saturday Night Live or something? Like and it was just sort of stunning to me. Like I assumed well, they relied on, Jim Stevenson, who was a brilliant, and there doesn't seem to be any Jim Stevenson or Jen Stevenson or anybody who they just sort of took a list of stuff that they heard on talk radio that is just, it's talking points, but it's not backed up by any I mean, I was sort of stunned by that. And meanwhile, we should also note there are 9 million children, and then another 9 million, many of whom are also probably children, who are now in a similar situation to all those millions of people who were worried about whether their Affordable Care Act health care was going to go away, their Medicaid health care was going to go away. The same situation as, Dreamers, although I think in some respects that's far more dramatic and just disturbing, where, the authorization for CHIP and for community health centers is due to come up in less than 24 hours or 30 hours, and they're not passing it. It doesn't, maybe they will in the next 15 hours or something, I don't know, but the money is going to go away. These community centers are going to have to shut down. The states don't have like a padding on their CHIP, are going to have to stop providing health insurance and health care for children. I mean, it's stunning. It's like there's no one home.
Well, there's no one home. And I mean, I think that what we're seeing here, and this hasn't penetrated, I don't think, to the general public yet, but what you just described, this lack of expertise, this, them looking around, having the chance to actually enact their agenda that they've been talking about for decades. They have everything. They have the full complement, and there's no national emergency like 9/11 or anything that, could possibly stand in their way. They could do this, and look at what's happening. The problem now has been exposed. That agenda was BS. I mean, it was what you just said. It was talking points. It's not real. Remember when Donald Trump on the trail used to say, we're going to fix health care, we're going to repeal and replace Obamacare, it'll be so easy, it'll be so quick. He even at one point said he was going to do it on the first day. You won't believe how quick it is. Everybody will be covered, everybody's going to be happy, it'll be cheaper, it'll be better, blah, blah, blah. Well, that's essentially what the Republicans have also been promising, right? They've been saying that, we're going to solve all the problems of the health care system. We're going to get rid of that awful Obamacare. We're going to get rid of Medicaid. We're going to do all this stuff. You, meaning, their voters or whoever is listening and thinks this sounds good, you will be better off. Everything's going to be great. It's going to be terrific for you. And we're going to take care of you. This is, utter nonsense. We knew it was. Before Obamacare was enacted, the healthcare system was teetering on the edge of a disaster for many, many people who were either going bankrupt, dying, suffering terribly from illnesses, or all of those things together. I mean, the Obamacare came together for a reason. It wasn't like they just, the Democrats just decided to do it for fun. It was a huge necessity that something be done. And, so the Republicans made great political hay out of that. It's the same way they've done with tax cuts, same way they've done with all the rest of their agenda. These are the answers, these are what we have to do. This is what's going to make your life better. Everything's the fault of the big government and the inefficiency, and we need freedom, so whatever their rap was over the years. And now that they have it, it's been exposed. There's nothing there. It's vapor. This was the sort of, basically they were winning on the basis of their kind of dog whistle racism over the years. And they tacked on this agenda that was supposed to make the feel-good agenda, maybe even in some cases the compassionate conservative agenda, whatever that was. And there's nothing there. They don't have any plans. They don't have any experts. They don't know what they're doing. They don't have, I don't know. What do these guys do all day? I mean, just talk to lobbyists? I can't. I fly around on private jets, I guess. But it's not like they're reading position papers, clearly.
I will take some of those rides on those private jets. I'm down for that. But I think, and it's interesting because we're starting to see it now with the tax reform. This is the tax reform, let's remember, that Paul Ryan has been dreaming of since he was standing around a keg in college 25 years ago. And it seems to me it's going to come down to the Democrats, the 3 or 4 Democrats that may, Donnelly, Manchin, and Heitkamp. And the question is, I mean, this is the, in my estimation, this is the difference between, on healthcare, the difference between Marco Rubio, President Rubio, and President Trump. The Republicans would have had no more or less of a clue as to what they were doing. But the Democrats, 2 or 3 of those Democrats would have peeled off. And under a Rubio, where they can't do it under a Trump when it comes to health care. And the question is, can they do it under Trump when it comes to taxes? That to me is the fundamental question, because it's going to be very hard for them to put together a tax plan that, a guy like Rand Paul might say, like, I'm not voting for this because it's adding $1.5 trillion in debt, okay? Because this is his brand. Might also be, Mike Lee's brand or Ted Cruz's brand. They may lose those guys because as they sort of tick through all the goodies they want to deliver to their donors, because, let's be honest, is there any possible constituency in the country for repealing the estate tax that can't fit into, like, literally into this office that we have here? I mean, physically, I think you could almost get everybody who's impacted by the estate tax. You could get them into a small theater in New York City, and.
Oh, I think you could get them into the green room. It's a very small group of people, less than 100, I think.
No.
Really
I think there were. In 2013, the number was somewhere around like 4,700 people. Now, 2013, I think the numbers may have been a little bit lower in terms of exemptions, but it's probably 3,000 estates on an annual basis, 3,500 estates, and that's nothing. It's nothing, and they've got the Republicans have this. You've seen this video. Should we talk about this video? Let's play this video. You can't hear it. So maybe, there's no sound. It is a video of like a text conversation between Chad, who owns a family farm, and some other person. And Chad says like, oh, we almost had to sell the farm 2 years ago because of the estate tax. And when my dad died. And the guy's like, oh, I had no idea, Chad. We should have tax reform. Now, just so that people understand, if Chad really almost had to sell off the family farm because they took almost half in taxes, first of all, that's impossible. Unless it's like, it is possible. But assuming the dad dies and the dad had gotten, it would have been at least a $5 million farm. And then after that, it would have been 35% on every dollar that farm was worth after that. And so it's probably like, to actually say it's about half, you have to get up in like the $50 million mark or something before, like, we almost
hell of a farm.
We almost had to sell our $50 million family farm. Now, upstate, I lived in a place where there was 34 farms. And they were small. And I can assure you, they were not $50 million farms or $5 million farms. I don't know. I mean, I think like the real question with this tax reform is just going to be tax cuts for rich, really, is if the Democrats can hold. And I guess that's probably what, Chuck Schumer hopefully is working on right now.
Well, yeah. I mean, and I don't know what he's, frankly, what Chuck is telling his people on this one. I mean, this one is a very, this is one where I think you're absolutely right that you could see Democrats moving. On the other hand, if the new, the populism that was sort of, that became part of the 2016 election and seems to have been growing up since at least 2010 with the Occupy Wall Street movement and other things where you see that, that would be a bad idea for those Democrats to back this. I mean, even on a purely practical level, I'm not sure that really the zeitgeist is with somebody like, Joe Manchin or Heidi Heitkamp on taxes. It'll be interesting to see what they think about it. I don't think I've heard them talk about this, but the idea that you give Trump and the Republicans, I should say, the party, this kind of a win in this particular climate, I personally think would be a big mistake, regardless, because, obviously for policy reasons it is, but even for political reasons, I think it's a mistake. This is Republican, holy grail is tax cuts. And one of the things that's putting Republicans in a real corner right now going into 2018 is the idea that they can't get anything done, that they are completely impotent despite the fact that they have the Congress and the presidency, and they can't get it done. Democrats should not help them. They should not try and save them through that. I think that's, a huge mistake, because that's a very, very compelling argument that is going to be used in these primaries, and they're going to get kooks like Roy Moore and going through all this, watching the Republican Party.
I think Bannon had a list of like three or four states where he was going to do this again, including Nevada.
Oh yeah,
and Arizona. I can't remember the others.
Tennessee. He's got in Tennessee. He's looking at he's got a list that they're going to involve themselves in Missouri. He's got money from the Mercers, and he is determined, in his view, to blow up the Republican establishment. Look, Bannon, everybody's acting like Bannon invented this idea. That's not true. The Koch brothers did it in 2010. Rich guys coming in with a bunch of money to run primaries against the Republican establishment.
Grover Norquist was doing this.
Thing.
I mean, I'm so old that I remember when Pat Toomey was the nut job that was, why are they doing this to Arlen Specter? This is so self-defeating for them, running Pat Toomey.
Right. I mean, this is what, this has been the conservative movement, playbook for quite some time. So Steve Bannon didn't invent this, and the New York Times is running, oh my God, they've an insurrection in the Republican Party. Well, it's an insurrection that's been going on for a while now.
Yeah, it's just changed their names,
the whole Tea Party thing. Yeah.
Yeah.
It's not,
I'm so annoyed, but I get, and then I feel like every 6 months you get that, like, they're finally overstepping their bounds. They've really screwed up again by letting the crazies out of the bag. Or when you start to hear, frankly, attempts by people to the left of sitting Democratic senators or House people, like, shouldn't primary, don't want to get stuck in the same position the Republicans are in. What do you mean? Like, control every aspect of our government and control the vast majority of state houses and the Supreme Court? I mean, this is they've been enormously successful with this recipe, and there's just sort of sense of like, yes, there may be a little opening if there are more Roy Moores in states that a Democrat could win. I mean, I think people should go out and support Jones, who's the Democratic candidate running against Roy Moore. I think that's as good a use as your resources at this moment as any, if you have to spare. But let's not kid ourselves that that's anything but a super, super long shot. I mean, Roy Moore was back on the Supreme Court twice. It's not like he's he got fired. And
they like him down there.
Yeah, they like him.
They like him.
And so I just think that there's a danger in that recipe where, like, Democrats are like, they're, going to blow themselves up. That may work for a year or two. It may work in 2018, and definitely 2018 is the primary, goal at the moment, obviously. But the Democrats have to start ramping up a little bit in terms of what they're offering if they want it to be durable. they want there to be any type of durable success, they need to start to develop a program. Maybe it's a tax plan. I don't know. Maybe they should come out and say, like, here's our tax plan. Rich people, you're paying double the estate tax. Period. End of story. This is not the estate tax. We're not even going to call it the estate tax anymore. We're going to call it the rich people estate tax. And honestly, they should be coming out and saying, we are in favor of the rich people estate tax and you make over $1 million a year tax, or whatever they want to call it.
Well, I have an idea. They can come out and call it, the Make America Great Again tax. They can put it on blue hats, and the tax could be, they could say, we're going to go back to the good old days, 1960.
Yep.
John F. Kennedy was the president, and he lowered the highest tax bracket. What was it, from something like 90% to 60%?
91 to 70, I believe it was.
Yeah, yeah, it was. So we're going to go back. We're going to make America great again, back in the good old days. That's what we're going to do. That's the Make America Great Again Democratic tax plan. And they should be fighting on that turf. I absolutely agree with you. And they're doing it on health care. I think that there's that, the sort of move toward the Medicare for all and single payer, and kind of setting the goalposts out, further than they've ever been. And so there is some effort to do that. And I do think, just to be clear, the 2018 election, which I agree with you, this is job one. It is very, very, very important to do everything possible to show and to prove at the ballot box that Donald Trump is not going to be validated by the American people, that this is not, something that that we're all signing on to here, that whatever happened in 2016 is going to be rectified by common sense among American voters. But, let's keep in mind that, the midterm elections are almost always referendums on the president. That's what it normally, barring some external event like 9/11, for instance, which ended up sort of giving George Bush the advantage in the 2002 election that he probably would not have had if it weren't for 9/11.
I agree.
Yeah,
he was mired in just in September of September 10th. He was looking pretty wounded. 2000. He wasn't getting his agenda. And in those days too, the Democrats. Talk about supine. They were rushing to help him pass tax cuts and do all that stuff. This was it was. Let's give the current Democrats enough credit for at least saying that they're not. They're not joining in vast numbers like they did. It was a much worse. This is the thing that I try and explain to people who are youngins. It was much worse, I think, back then. Obviously, following 9/11, and granted, we're only 9 months into this presidency. Who knows what's going to happen in month 12 or 13? But it was much worse. The Democrats were worse, and the administration was very competent in doing bad things. This administration is incompetent. They want to do bad things. They are degrading things, but in some ways, the way they're going about it, and the fact that Democrats haven't capitulated, which is maybe because of the way that Donald Trump goes about it, is you get the sense that there are people biding their time more rather than fully capitulating in the way that they did during the Bush years. But I also got to say, we talked about this briefly the other day, that there's a real sense that I get that people are just exhausted by this. That people are in some ways are just trying to tune out. I sort of feel like people went away in the summer for their vacations and said, I'm going to take a week where I'm not going to, follow the news or something like that. And then we're just like, oh my God, I feel much better than, and that is, I think, really honestly, that is a danger. I feel like the whole Clinton years from 92 to 2000, That's what that was, it seems to me, was just like people left of center saying, oh, thank God we have no Reagan, and the Reagan era is over. Now I can go back to leading my life like I wanted to and don't have to pay attention to politics. And it metastasized during that time.
Oh, I think it's absolutely true. I mean, I certainly feel it. I personally feel it. And I know that if this weren't my job, if I wasn't required, I would be pulling back a lot, because it is emotionally very, very difficult to. I mean, my level of anger and frustration, and just this daily astonishment at what I'm watching take place. I mean, there was a level of stimulation in all of that during the election and in the immediate, first few months of the Trump administration, where it was a train wreck. You couldn't take your eyes off of it. And now it's bad enough and overwhelming enough, I think, that you can't look anymore. I mean, there's a sense, I know among people that I know, and it's certainly among my readers, I get the sense, and some of them are being explicit about it, which is just, I can't do this anymore. I can't, I gotta step back. This is too much, and that is a very, very dangerous thing. I hadn't thought about the Clinton comparison, but I think you may be right. That at that point, I mean, I was watching pretty closely in the '90s. That it was overwhelming. And I think a lot of liberals kind of said, hey, Clinton's got this, and he's in the White House, and he's, having to flail against this bombardment from the right, and it became really difficult and unpleasant and uncomfortable to kind of watch it on any kind of in a detailed, focused way. So I think people did withdraw, and I think the same thing is happening here, and that is very dangerous. And it's not because you're right in pointing out that Trump is incompetent, and in some ways that's a saving grace in many ways, that he's unable to accomplish most of what's going to the bad things that are happening so far are in discrete areas. He has put competent people into the immigration area
Yep.
in the Department of Homeland Security and in the Department of Justice with Sessions. That group of people, and I don't know from within how much resistance there is. I get the sense that in the Department of Justice there is a little bit of resistance, at least coming from places like,
Career people.
Career people who are kind of, if nothing else, they're dragging their feet in implementing some of the worst. But those two areas, law enforcement, the authoritarian side of the federal government. In fact, the head of the DEA just resigned because he couldn't go along with the program. So there are areas that are working, but for the most part, everything is it's badly managed. Everything about it, they aren't putting people in place. They can't get anybody confirmed. They're not hiring anybody. People are quitting. I mean, it's a mess. It's a major, major mess, and that is terrible because lives are going to be affected by the federal government ineptitude. But it's not as if Dick Cheney was there, directing every, agency across the government to be implementing this malevolent right-wing agenda. I mean, that much we're not seeing. But,
There's
the
time.
horror show, there's plenty of time, and, what he can do by accident is so extreme. I mean, we've seen this with what is happening with North Korea. That this is, I mean, I'm as scared, I think, as I've ever been. I haven't thought about nuclear war in 20 years, 30 years really, since Reagan was in, and suddenly, this is part of my consciousness again, and that is very, very uncomfortable feeling. I can understand why everybody's kind of go, oof, I need a break. I got to take a break. I mean, we can't really, because it's still happening, whether we're paying attention or not.
Heather Parton, Digby, the blog is Hullabaloo. The daily column is at salon.com. Thank you so much for your time today. I really appreciate it.
Thanks for having me, Sam. It was great.
All right, folks, we're going to take a quick break, and when we come back, that dude that we were talking about is causing the malaise. I mean, this is the thing that I wonder when I watch Anthony's show is like, what is it doing to him as a man? That is really what I want to know. I almost feel like we should, bring people on around him to see. But I guess we'll find out. If it's turned him in, well, I'm going to call him right now. All right, we're going to take a quick break. When we come back, Anthony Atamanuik, you may know him as Donald Trump. We are back. Sam Seder on the Majority Report on the phone, ladies and gentlemen. It is a real pleasure to welcome to the program. He is a writer, a comedian, an actor. He is the host of The President Show on Comedy Central, which plays on Thursday nights. I guess technically Thursday night, or is it really Friday morning? Anthony Atamanuik, welcome to the program.
Thank you, Sam. Yeah, midnight is a hard one because you go, do you say it's early Friday morning or do you say it's late Thursday night?
I don't know, but I think that's why they call it midnight.
That's exactly right.
Now, let me just say this, and people who've been listening to the program for a while, I had the chance to come in with one of your live practice shows as you were doing this, and I had seen videos of you doing the debate tour with James Adomian, who was playing Bernie Sanders.
Yeah.
And I had seen it, on video and this and that. But when I came in and saw you for the first time in that wig and stood next to you, it was one of the most disturbing experiences I feel like I've had since I accidentally watched my daughter being born.
Why accidentally, Sam?
I'll tell you something. It was an accident. It was maybe I should have said mistakenly actually. And by born I mean actually came out. Like it was the experience was so sort of it was gross and disturbing and neither one of those things has left me since then.
Well, I'll say that, you're not the first person to say that. In fact, one of our executive producers and co-showrunner, Christine Nangle, the other day after a show, she hugged me and she went, "My God," she goes, "that's the first time I've hugged you as Trump." Because for weeks, for months, she was like, "I can't be near you in the costume."
Let me ask you this, okay? Because you play Trump. I mean, you're playing Trump as a character. You're not doing an impression of Trump. You are playing a character, Donald Trump, which is very similar to the real Donald Trump. And having done some acting in the past, particularly like stage shows that go on for months.
Yeah,
I know that this stuff permeates your brain, and
it does.
And what's happened to you?
Well, I meditate every day. This is really true. I actually meditate. I do mindfulness meditation 30 minutes a day. I think you have to have a healthy psyche, or work on having one, because it does get into you, or I would say get out of you. I mean, part of the most frightening thing, I think, or not even frightening, but intriguing and sometimes scary thing about doing a performance of a character for this long is that, you're drawing it from within yourself, which means you have to kind of make peace with the part of yourself that is kind of like him, and the aspects of my psyche that I'm drawing up to sort of be like him. And in other aspects, it's almost liberating because, you could argue that one of the things that Trump does is he sort of just breaks basic social norms. He has an antisocial personality, not in the sense of not being, obviously he's not a shy person, but antisocial in the sense of not having regard for sort of the compact that we have as people between each other. And so to kind of let that part of you fly is a weird balancing act. There's sort of a liberating part where you're kind of getting to say whatever you want and act any way you want with impunity, and then there's another part where you're accessing sort of darker thinking in your mind, and you have to have a cap on that. I try to maintain a part of my own brain when I'm doing it, and remember that, I think that it's a good assessment to say it's an acting job less than an impression, because I want there to be such a depth of performance that I can kind of ride that automatically and allow for the satirical nature of what we're doing to sort of punch through. And sometimes the best way to do that is to represent the thing exactly how it is, and then watch people react in horror to it, and then sort of remind them that this is real, that someone really is doing these things right now. We had a thing in the show last night where I was interviewing Frank Rich, and we talked about FDR for a second, and as Trump, I was like, I don't like presidents who can't walk,
I was just going to ring. Yeah, go ahead.
And then I kind of tied it to the McCain comment, and the audience, kind of recoiled. And I used to do this in a live show. I was like, I've said that. I've really said the McCain thing. Is it such a leap to think that he would say that about FDR? It's not. And I think it's a good way of reminding people, and we need to stay vigilant in that fact, of what a repulsive, repugnant, and totally non-thoughtful, with no even idea, not even idea, but no responsibility towards who they are, how they behave, or what dangerous ideologies and movements they're causing in society by what they do. I mean, we've proven that putting someone at the top of the heap in the United States who is as unhinged as the president is really does affect the national psyche and stokes a lot of hatred and xenophobia and division in ways that I think are right now at this point becoming irreparable.
Yeah, we were just actually. I just had Heather Parton on, who writes under the name Digby at Hullabaloo, and she was saying, like, I don't think we go back from this. I mean, and I think that's the case. I wonder now. Let me just say, and I want to move on actually, because I want to talk about that aspect of you have the ability to sort of like you're in character, you're out of character on some level, But does you're married, right?
Yes.
Has your wife commented you've changed? I mean, I just don't understand. I'll tell you, I played a cop for 5 days on New York City streets, and people thought I was a cop because it was a very small production, and there were two cops there who were watching, and this was 20 years ago, but it took me 3 or 4 weeks to get over the impulse of telling people riding their bike on the sidewalk to get over, move. And I just get have you changed at home? Has she picked up on any of this?
Well, I think I think that there's sort of there was sort of a spike in the beginning. There was a spike in the beginning. I know my stepfather, ironically, when I'd come home, my stepfather would be like, "You are acting like him." Because he would sort of say it when I was just being myself, and I would be mortified because you're insulted. You're like, how dare you? But I mean, I think that when I first got into it, it was hard to sort of create the line. But, I mean, not to get too, like, I guess, actor studio-y, but, like, that is part of your technique and training. I mean, part of your job is to figure out the division, to be able to turn it on and off, and to figure out how to be inside it. But, yeah, I mean, it's definitely changed me. But in a way, I think for the better, not because of him, but because reconciling, with the Jungian notion of the shadow, right?
Mm.
The shadow self being the parts of you that you don't want to face and really sort of, but are presented all the time without you really, attending to it or knowing it. I've had a lot of opportunity to sort of reckon with my shadow, and, there's something in psychology about sort of the totality of self or the tension of opposites, where it's better to have a present mind about the dark parts of yourself as well as the parts we like, because it makes you a wholer person and you're sort of more aware of who you are. So I think after the initial spike of sort of being too in the character sometimes at home, you're not at home like playing Trump, but like sort of being too pushy or too cavalier or whatever, it actually, I think, it helped me evolve and sort of understand the spaces where I can be like that and actually witness them. So in a weird way, it's been maybe more helpful. It's actually made me a little bit more of an attentive person to myself. But yeah, my wife, we're pretty fine. When I get home, I mean, not to be like, I host this TV show and all this, but like my life hasn't changed. I live in Queens. I still see my neighbors. I still take the subway in. And when I get home, I get home and, do what I've done for 17 years living in New York. I hang with my wife and watch the tube and read the paper, and I try to keep it separate.
Right, and then go out and tell anybody who's not white to get out of the country.
Yeah. We have a thing when we do. I think you were there. I don't think you were there when in the test show. We didn't do this yet, but as Trump, I come out before the show, and I kind of talk to the audience, and I look at for any people of color in the audience, and he's done that weird thing at rallies where he'll point out a black person,
there's my
and then
black
give
guy.
the black power, and he'll give the black power symbol, and go so cool. And what you find, and I can only speak for myself from my experience, and I don't want to speak for other people's experience, but what I find is that there's a weirdly almost like liberating and inclusive act by calling those things out on the floor,
Right.
Sort of, and I think to the broader thing of sort of whiteness and like how whiteness permeates so many everything in the United States, and sort of acknowledging the ignorance of whiteness in a larger way than just Trump. Which I think is really important. Like the show's about Trump, but the show's really about the systemic problems that have led us here for 200 years, for 50 years in the modern sort of era of the Southern Democrats moving to the Republican Party. Like, this is more than just Trump, right? This is a culture, a civilizational problem that we have. And although there's many other aspects that are failings in sort of the Trump presidency and republicanism and maybe not conservative ideology, which I think probably has some good ideas, maybe, I don't know.
Really?
But I think that race is the big thing that's always in the forefront and on the table right now because I think we've chosen to elect somebody who's turning all those stones over and showing us how much actually lives underneath the surface in this country.
Yeah, I mean, I think, and frankly, I mean, I think it's always been there.
I do too.
And it's there. I don't know if there's any race. I don't know if there's any other real dynamic that has animated American politics more through the years. But
yeah.
So let me ask you this, and I have to say, like, the show is one of the best shows out there of like smart and stupid comedy simultaneously, and I really that's the thing I think is amazing about it. I mean, I can't tell if it was because I was there that day, the first time I saw the show. You guys in the live show, you played a pre-roll, and there was this moment where this because I couldn't stop talking about this for months, where you're out like doing a tour of New York City and the truck thing, and I know you've probably talked about this a million times, But the
Sure.
the truck, you see a truck and you totally improv this, but you walk us through this sort of fantasy that Trump has about driving the big truck, which we had just seen, and then basically driving off the edge of a pier and slowly drowning himself. And I was in the back of the room, like with tears streaming down my face. It was so cathartic to sort of see like how deeply disturbed he was and be able to sort of, it's really amazing. And that's one of the best things about the show, I think, is like you guys you get inside his head and just sort of speculate what could possibly be going on there.
Yeah, I mean that I think is come back to the thing we're talking about how do I reckon with that, and I think that's how I reckoned with it. I think on the tour with James, I would have these moments, in the tour late at night in a hotel room where I would really be like, what am I doing? Like, am I doing service to this person? Am I actually being satirical? Or, because there's always that line that you have to reflect on, that when you're representing someone, you still are elevating that you're putting that person forward in a new permutation. And so I think that the compact we made with ourselves at the show was that if we go inside, everyone goes outside on an impression, right? Everything is outside, right? I think the other famous impression is sort of all about the outside. And so I said, well, okay, if they're going to go out, and I had already been doing it before they went out, but I was like, I'm going to go in. And I think in is more interesting because it's all inward is every possibility, every permutation of the sort of core equation of what we know he is. And then you can sort of have, like you said, a catharsis, and it's this weird marriage. I mean, and again, there's a lot of great writers here who are the ones who, make this happen. But there's a marriage between, and I think it's true because, Trump, you have to think about who he is. He is sort of a combination of like a classic rube, almost like a silent film rube. But he's also sort of like a weird, sad rat packer that like isn't really part of the rat pack. He's also sort of like an elderly Jewish dowager. Yeah. He's like, he's all these different things. He's like an old woman who's clutching his pearls. He's like and so you have so many permutations of how he is that can kind of take him apart and litigate him. And I think that the inside, then it's more accessible and funny. And then, we like the combination of stupid and smart because, he is weirdly, I don't want to give him the credit of being smart, but he is sort of stupid smart. There'll be moments where you're like, wait a minute, how did you just deftly like manipulate the crowd to do that? And then other moments where you're like, you're such a stone cold idiot. How is this possible? You're sitting in this truck and honking the horn. So I think it works on a level where, we have a lot of international viewers too. And I think that, you want to be able to get that satire across to a person who maybe isn't speaking English fully. And you have to do things that are broad as well as very sort of specifically intelligent. And I think that makes it more accessible. I always say our show is sort of like your show of shows if it was like a political satire show.
It's funny about the foreign thing. I had a buddy who just came back from China who he said who was working over there, actually in comedy. And he said that literally all it takes is to say Trump to people and they start to laugh. That they just... They laugh. He said, all you have to do, you go either China, and they start laughing hysterically because they know what it is, or Trump, and they laugh. They just laugh. And the other thing that strikes me, too, is that, and you don't necessarily see this, but because you see people who will do impressions of politicians who are not political people, but you're an extremely political person. I mean, right? I mean, you and I know Adomian is also an extremely
very
political person. And you were heavily invested in him losing the election. I mean, you're like the type of person who would listen to this show, frankly.
Yes, I do listen to your show.
Well, but I mean, which is, you got to be really, I think, political, and that to me, I think, is also sort of fascinating about the whole thing because it's not. You're trying to create a statement. I wonder, like, do you guys? And I guess maybe you just addressed that a little bit, but
Sure.
do you run up against situations, or is it sort of a slam dunk with a guy like this, where you're like, it's funnier this way, but I don't want to let him off the hook if I do that?
Oh, yes, that's a conversation we have all the time. I mean, we have a couple of rules around here, around the show. One of them is that Trump is like a loaded gun, and only we know how to fire it. So, we never let anyone else write for the Trump. It's very rare that we'll put my Trump on another show if we're not in control of the writing.
Right.
And we have another, one of our core rules is that there's no race baiting, sexism, homophobia as an comedy done as an excuse because we have Trump. You know what I mean? Like the idea that, you can sort of, comics or, you can sort of get away with like, oh, well, we're playing a racist character, so now we can do a racist thing. We're playing a sexist character, so we can do a sexist thing. And that's such a cop-out, and it's very surface. So our notion is always to turn it back on him, and also to look at, just like I said earlier, is like to look past him. It's like it's about him, and obviously the show is driven from his mind, and the notion of the show is kind of immersive. Like we imagine that this is like he produces this show to some degree,
right.
And like, but also like. Yeah, I don't need to do like orange-faced monster jokes or like, I don't need to do that stuff because that doesn't get us anywhere. What gets us somewhere is we have a very strong research department, and we have Howard Feynman as like our head, news godfather. And we are spending our time every week finding out not only what the news of the day is, but what are the trends, and where do we think this is going to go, and where can we be ahead of a story? So we're as much, I think, a news sort of a leftist news show disguised as a silly comedy show, or maybe an editorial show more so. So that I would rather sacrifice a joke to make a stronger point, because that, to me, is worth it. And as long as the framing devices and the sort of overall humor of it is constantly punching at the audience and making people respond to it, I personally believe that comedy is best and most effective when you put people in a variety of emotional states, as opposed to just only laughing at something. Like, I want people
right.
to be offended by something he says. I want people to be frightened by the potential of what he could do. And then I also want, the gallows humor of us laughing at the absurdity of where we're at and who he is. I think all those things packaged together. But yeah, there's an agenda with this show. It is not I'm not here to just do a silly Trump show.
Has that agenda
Yeah.
changed? I mean, like, because I remember at the end of the practice show, you you sort of looked to camera and said, like, I will stop doing this if you stop being president. And I really had a sense that you thought, like, hey, there's, I don't think this is going to happen, but there's like if there's a 1 in 1,000 chance that he just goes like, fuck it. I don't want to be made fun of anymore. And he steps down, you would have been like, yes.
I would be thrilled. I'd be thrilled to retire from this
But
job.
I mean, I imagine by now you've resigned yourself to the fact that he's going to exist. I mean, on some level, like I had the same dynamic, and I think like in the news, broadly speaking, that dynamic is there because, I mean, I know people have said, when people ask me what I do, I do a political talk show podcast. Oh, this must be a pretty great time for you. And I'm like, it is the worst time of my career. I mean, more people listen, but I would much
rather
and
have it be that.
It's sort of like a conflict a little bit.
I think when people present that to me, because, people will say to you like, oh, you do Trump, you must be doing great. This is great for you, And I understand that because, it's sort of casual, small talk that people are also making. But like, I don't kind of buy that I don't buy that because there has been political satire and also, news and information long before Trump existed. And I feel like the reward of the show for me is to, push 77,001 people to not vote for him in Michigan, Wisconsin,
Right.
and Pennsylvania next time around. Like I always say this is like a bee sting show, right? The bee stings and then it dies. It's like that's what I want to do. I want to sting and die. And then, because also the notion that like, I don't want to have that narrow or limited a view on, what my career or life is. Like I don't want to play this guy for, a long period of time. I don't want to be like, God bless him, but I don't want to be Gilligan, wearing the hat when I'm like 75. I want to do other things, and I think I have the fortune of the fact that I'm older and I've been performing in live theater in New York for a decade and a half, and had a very nice had a nice life, put
Right.
together a nice life. I'm not I'm not champing at the bit to just like I want to create more things, but like I'm also not going to be devastated at the idea of having to step back into a different life for a while if this show ended because of his presidency ended. I would be thrilled by it and know that there would be something else that I would end up creating and doing. And also I just think like it's sad that it takes this to get people to really reflect and have a discourse about what's going on in the country. And what I hope this stokes is a larger discourse about for-profit media and about news that is driven by ratings and attention-grabbing stories that are all about litigating the sort of horse race politics of, how or whether they're surviving or winning because of what they said versus the content of their policy and what they do. And we're at a dangerous precipice in this country, partly because of our lack of civics education, a larger population that does not understand sort of the basic functions of government and what and how it operates. And in confluence with that, we have, tribalistic divisions that are being stoked every day. So Bannon in a weird way is correct when he said that's at the speech at when I forget the guy's name right now, when Moore won in Alabama, where he said, we have to keep going. We have to stick to the plan. We will grow more and more people. And I think that people need to start listening to that and start understanding that our belief that it's impossible that this could happen is partly predicated on the fact that we live in international citadels on the coast. We live in places where our notion of the anger and disillusionment of a lot of citizens in this country, right or wrong thinking, whatever it is real, and it can eventually flip the switch for all of us. And I think that that's the more central thesis of what I want, hopefully the show to be about, from moment to moment, because you can't do that all the time or everyone will just hang themselves while they were watching the show. But, we're in serious times. So like Trump,
Well, let me ask you about that. I mean, this is sort of like off of my agenda a little bit, but what do you think? I mean, if that is the case, all right, and I do think that I think there is, I definitely think that there's two separate existences in this guy. I mean, there's more than that, and I think, but in terms of the political the ideological split, and right. I think the right is far more cohesive in this way in many respects. I think that's a function of like literally just separate media, like just completely, if you are living in large swaths of the country, you watch Fox News, you watch your local Sinclair media, then you get in your car and you hear only right-wing talk shows, period, end of story. There's nothing else you bump into at all. And I don't even know what the clearance is on Comedy Central. Maybe it's, it's more extensive now, but But that's just the reality of our society, that it's a function of, I mean, I think experientially there's a lot of people out there, but I'm not as sold on the idea that Donald Trump is there because of economic problems, although I think those economic problems are real. I think they're equally dispersed across the country.
Yes, absolutely, I agree with that.
I think aggrievement has been built, like a more cultural aggrievement has been built amongst the conservatives. So what do we do about that? Once assuming for a moment you had the ability to flick a switch and everybody in these citadels was aware of that, what's the answer to it?
I think that's a large question, but
you are the president of the United States, sir.
And I can answer it. I can answer it as the president. I think that I agree with you that it is not solely an economic depression that got Trump elected. I think that there's a combination of factors, also including media manipulation online. And I think as we learn more about Twitter and Facebook buys, I think that we're learning that there was a lot of
But even putting aside the election itself, I mean, the fact is this shit's been growing for 20 years, way before Trump, way before even the 2008 crash.
Oh, you're saying, how do we clean up the deeper mess? I mean, I think that you have to think about relationship rules, right? If you break up with somebody, it takes, two times the amount of time you're with each other to get over it?
Really?
So, I mean, it's not a real rule, but that's something I heard, in college. But I think if you kind of apply that logic, it's like, if we really look at, let's say it's about 45 years. Let's just argue that 45 years when there's sort of this coalescing of this idea of the silent majority. The Southern Democrats are fully entrenched in now the Republican Party. You have clear race baiting. You move into the 80s, and Ronald Reagan and the Republican Party found a way to parallel the Democrat get out the vote effort in black churches, to do it with evangelical super churches, marrying conservatism with a sort of religious patriotism, right, making this sort of American Christ figure that is like each conservative president. So you have these ideas that are like you said, really deeply permeating and hard to pull out. So you get rid of Trump, and everyone's aware in all these coastal cities. Liberals are more aware of this thing. I think that I don't know right now, looking at it. I think that people ultimately rise to the level at which they're peaked, and I think if you had an opportunity to resolve, in my view, a failing market-based system that is no longer viable in the United States. We're not going to return to making a bunch of steel. We're not going to make 300,000 coal jobs or whatever. These things aren't going to happen. And the amount of manufacturing that we can do in this country, even with robots and all the sort of modern technology that's changing how we do manufacturing in this country, the truth is that cost of living versus wage earning and job availability is number one in terms of how people see their lives. People are far less likely to start getting involved and stoked with other sort of social issues, race issues, tribalistic issues, if they have something to do and feel fulfilled as a person. And then the second thing is to reintroduce into public education an understanding of what exactly our civic system is about. And I think then you would have to spend a decade creating a plan for our civilization in terms of what do we want to achieve as human beings, what do we want to do after a market-based system, how do we want to continue to evolve as a race of people on this planet, but also what are our visions for how we want to evolve as a people. And nobody's laying that out right now. We don't have any vision beyond our sort of petty divisions and sort of our 20th century notion of sort of nation baiting and invading countries and leaving a wasteland. So I think that how do you unwind people who are members of a cult? I mean, you can argue that what you just said about someone watching Fox, listening to talk radio, right, reading tweets online, these are all signs of a cult. They're all the signs of a cult, being indoctrinated, constantly having to hear. I mean, that is sort of the baseline of when someone is involved in a cult. They hear the same thing all the time. They only see it as one opportunity, and they perceive the leadership as the only thing and the answer, and they're also often married to a deity, right? The leadership is the deity. And the Republican Party has chosen to be the party, right or wrong. I mean, I know it's wrong, but for
Right.
whatever, to say we are the Godhead, right? We are the Godhead. We're the ones who are both we are pious. We represent God. We represent, I mean, when you hear them talking about being a Christian nation, that's what they mean. They don't just mean we're a Christian nation. They're saying we're a white nation. We are a white Christian cult. And what do you do with people in cults? You have to deprogram them. And I don't know, that's where I have to step away in the sense of I don't know how you do that besides sort of almost generationally allowing people to sort of have their fits and tantrums about how they feel they're losing the country. And then slowly, generation after generation, people are going to move along from this idea that something's going to happen apocalyptic and see that we're still here producing, making things, doing things. And we all know this in terms of Tip O'Neill's All Politics is Local, that even when it comes to racism, you could have some factory worker in upstate New York or some guy who works in New York City or works in Ohio, and or lady, and they work with somebody, and they work with two black guys and a Latino lady, and they go, oh, they're fine. I know them. I work with them. They're fine. It's the people in Chicago. It's the people over here.
Right.
They're bad, right? So what we have to also understand is I think the greatest deficit in our country and probably around the world is our total lack of understanding and regard for the science of mental health and how our well-being is partly defined by our perspective on the world and our understanding of our local sort of relationships versus our global relationships. And so when you combine those two ideas of are we as a people, how do we earn and survive, jobs, manufacturing, cost of living, with our well-being mentally and how we view the world and how do we view the other versus which we know. Those are the things that are being perverted and abused. And my feeling is that if I can sit here as an atheist who can understand, though, principles from religions that are valuable, such as looking at the most hateful person I can think of that might, come from somewhere else that is a big Trumper or a big right-winger and is a xenophobe, and I can figure out not to endorse them, not to sympathize with them, but to empathize with the condition of pain that they come from that led them to that point, I can at least begin the idea of understanding how to relate to that person. And so as great as it is that we all, my friends here in the city, we all agree with each other, or we have friends who are conservatives, but they're palatable and we can debate with them or whatever, right? The notion is to take the person who we feel is ugly, who we feel is repulsive, and figure out how to understand our empathy with that person. And that's hard. And it's not easy, and a lot of who we are is going to fight against that. And those folks, right or wrong, feel the exact same way about us. And we know, and it's not all sides. It's not like they have the same grievance as we do. I do think that there is a prevailing wisdom that is true, which is that allowing people to be who they are, allowing people to realize themselves both in their gender identity, their race, their job choice, their life choice, their gender, so on, that is clearly a more progressive and more, not even progressive, it is a more human way of regarding each other. But we have to understand that just unfortunately not every person is seeing things that way, and we're going to have to figure out how to at least broach that subject, because we don't want to get into the dehumanizing zone of Israel where Palestine and Israel are to a degree both in some places they work together, or you have Palestinians who live in Jerusalem and so on, but there is an otherism there that is violent and sad, right?
Right.
And we are cruising towards that place right now of an otherism that is so, and just think about this. Look at Sunnis and Shiites. This is not new. We're talking about there are groups of people who for thousands of years have divided into others. And we, I think, have an opportunity to show through example to the world how we could not do that, and we're doing the opposite.
So, long way of saying we're fucked. And
Yeah, we're fucked.
Anthony, thank you so much for coming on. The show
Sam,
is great.
thank you.
I really enjoy it, and thank you
Yes,
for doing
you
it.
have to come back on the show.
Anytime.
Okay.
We'll see you. We'll see you later. All right, Anthony.
see
Thank
you.
you so much, Anthony
Okay, thank you,
Atamanuik. The show is on, like we said, midnights on Thursday, but then you can find it on Comedy Central, like on ComedyCentral.com. All right, we're going to take a quick break and head into the fun half of the program, ladies and gentlemen. Wherein we will play some sound. We'll take some phone calls. We will read your IMs. Do we have a Jimmy Reefer cake? I don't think so. I didn't notice one. Everybody's on vacation today. Everybody's taking just like a random vacation. Why not? We've had, I got another $1 million email. Nope, not quite.
Not a legitimate one yet?
No. Folks, if you're not offering $1 million to the program, or to me personally, please do not put that in the subject line. It screws up everything that we're doing here. Everything comes to a halt. I wait.
An alarm goes off.
Gather everybody around the computer, and I'm like, this could be it. It's like the lottery goes off, and then. So please, no more emails with the subject line $1 million. However, if you would like to support this program, become a member today by going to jointhemajorityreport.com. It doesn't take $1 million. It takes a few dollars. It takes $2.50 a week. That's 50 cents a weekday. And then it's 30 cents a day. 30 cents a day for this program that you enjoy. Maybe enjoy it twice a week. Maybe enjoy it 3 times a week. 4 times a week? I know you can't enjoy it 5 times a week. But
if there was a vending machine you could buy podcasts at, 50 cents that'd be a cheap vending machine.
That'd be a super cheap vending machine. I don't think there's a vending machine out there that takes 50 cents for anything now. You can't buy a pack of gum for that. JoinTheMajorityReport.com. But remember, if you want the fun half of the program and you can't afford it, send us an email at majorityreporters@gmail.com, and we will help you out. Also, justcoffee.coop, fair trade coffee, tea, or chocolate. Use the coupon code majority, get 10% off. Check out Too Much Michael Brooks show on Tuesday nights, or you can just sign up for it on iTunes, and see you in the fun app.
Think of all the times she said no, 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 no. Like to speak my mind. She said no, 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 no. And I know her time's not free. She didn't waste none on me. Situation sad. She said no, 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 no. Things are looking bad. She said no, 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 no. And
situation sad. She said, no, 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 things are looking bad. She said, no, 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 and if it was up to me, I'd tell her king or free. No, 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 no.
We are back. Sam Seder on the Majority Report. That Anthony Atamanuik, so surfacey, right?
Read a book.
Yeah, really. How about digging into politics a little bit? I can tell you that having that depth of thought about our political situation, not typical for most people doing a comedy TV show.
I think it definitely shows in the show itself too.
Definitely. He does have this amazing ability to go I'm playing Trump, but I'm not really Trump. And Trump actually said this. That thing is pretty good. I will say though, I got interviewed. New York Times reporter was doing a piece on Sarah Silverman, and they called me to ask about her days in New York 20 years ago. More. And, I was talking to the guy, and I'm like, he was saying, was she a political comedian back then? I'm like, nobody really was. I mean, I was doing stuff about the first Iraq invasion when I started comedy in the early 90s in Boston. And people were just like, what are you doing? And comedians, there were exceptions. Barry Crimmins was there in Boston, and I would see Barry Crimmins. But they were exceptions. Comedians were not political until the late aughts, I would say. Even The Daily Show. It wasn't until 2004 or 5 that it became more political than critical of the news. And Colbert, was the first sort of really explicitly political commentary comedy show. And that was, I think, 2000, maybe that was 2000, started 2003 or 4. But it was not like it is today. It's really different. And this guy I presume he's young. The one thing I'm starting to notice about being my age is I have secret information. That when I walk around people who I talk to, I have secret information of what happened in the 90s. We were talking to Digby about the heck of a job brownie quality to what we're seeing. This was fascinating. You've got the Trump administration desperately attempting to argue that everything's fine. It's becoming apparent, right, that Donald Trump's strategy on anything is to lie and say it's going well, or we got it covered, we're 2 weeks out, we're doing this, X, Y, Z is happening, etc. And I would imagine there's also now an understanding amongst cabinet secretaries broadly, and that you've got to follow that program, right? Everybody comes into a meeting, they look around, they say, look, whatever's going on, say it's going well, and then we'll deal with the problems internally. Never, ever say anything negative about what's happening in public. Here's Elaine Duke. She's the acting Secretary of Homeland Security. They are playing a clip of her on CNN for the mayor of San Juan, Puerto Rico. This was just yesterday, Thursday. And you can't see if you can see the video, you can see the look on the face of the mayor from Puerto Rico. And then you start to hear it in her voice and what she's saying. But at first she's trying to maintain like some composure. And then she's just like, you got to be kidding me. Here is that clip.
Oh, it is really a good news story in terms of our ability to reach people and the limited number of deaths that have taken place in such a devastating hurricane.
Head Mayor.
Well, maybe from where she's standing, it's a good news story. When you're drinking from a creek, it's not a good news story. When you don't have food for a baby, it's not a good news story. When you have to pull people down from their buildings, because I'm sorry, but that really upsets me and frustrates me. You know, I would ask her to come down here and visit the towns and then make a statement like that, which frankly, it is an irresponsible statement, and it contrasts with the statements of support that I have been getting since yesterday when I got that call from the White House. Damn it, this is not a good news story. This is a people are dying story. This is a life or death story. There's a truckload of stuff that cannot be taken to people's story. This is a story of a devastation that continues to worsen because people are not getting food and water. If I could scream it a lot more louder, it is not a good news story when people are dying, when they don't have dialysis, when their generators aren't working and their oxygen isn't providing for them. Where is there good news here? I mean, the good news is that we're getting heard. The good news is that there's boots on the ground. The good news is that the people from FEMA have their heart in the right place and the HHS people know what to do. For heaven's sake, somebody let them do their job. Let them get the food and the water in the hands of people. And then let's talk about good news. And I'm really sorry. But you know, when you have people out there dying, literally, scraping for food, where is the good news?
Yeah, I don't know what to add to that. You know, going out there and telling that story. And the thing is, there is a large segment of the country here that is just going to hear the acting chief of Homeland Security say this is a good news story. Period. That's where it ends. They will not hear that clip of the mayor. But it's still an ongoing disaster. And hopefully now that the military has mobilized, hopefully they'll have averted, you know, something just truly horrible. But playing it pretty close. Pretty close. Let's go to the phones. You're calling from a 317 area code. Who's this? Where are you calling from? 317.
Good day, majority reporters.
Is this Gorka?
This is renowned scholar Sebastian Gorka, former White House advisor and expert on radical Islamic terrorism.
Hello?
First, Sam, I'd like to notify the audience that my analysts have pre-selected you for acceptance into the MAGA coalition. Congratulations.
Thank you. Thank you. This is one of those pre-recording things. There's not even a real person on the other end.
Robo Gorka.
If there is time, please.
I didn't answer the way it was supposed like pre-programmed to.
I'd like to share a sample of the MAGA newsletter we have out this week.
I guess at this point I say, sure. Oh, all right.
I'm intrigued.
I'm definitely intrigued. I wonder if this comes with one like a timeshare situation, like a free cruise to the Caribbean. Calling from a 610 area code. Who's this? Where are you calling from?
Sam, it's Mike from Pennsylvania. How are you?
Mike from Pennsylvania. I've been waiting to hear from you, buddy.
Hey, sorry, I've been really busy trying to help the 15th not actually field a candidate, but we'll see what happens.
All right. Well, good luck with that.
Yeah, not looking too good right now. Yeah, I wanted to talk a little bit about some stories that I don't see anyone talking about, which I think are way more important than, say, the $1 million on the charter jets.
Right.
Right now, they're trying to privatize air traffic control.
Yep.
And they're removing the regulations that were put on. Do you remember that major accident in upstate New York when I think there was like 100 people died due to the pilots not having experience?
It
happened, I don't know,
an airplane?
10 years ago, I think.
An airline?
Yeah, it happened a while ago. Yeah, it happened a little while ago, a few years ago. But in response to that, the FAA put in some pilot hour requirements that you couldn't fly in an airliner before you had 1,500 hours flying. And they're basically trying to repeal that down to 250. Obviously, the airlines are opposed, the pilots union is opposed to it, the safety people are opposed to it. And this is just a small sample of the regulatory full court press, that's deregulation full court press that's going on in all.
Yep, you there? Hello? Is that him or me?
I think that's him.
Mike, call back. Calling from a 509 area code. Who's this? Where are you calling from? Maybe it was me. Something weird going on with our... Stay on that line. Something weird going on with the Skype today. 6-4... Bear with us. Bear with us. 646-257-3920. I'm going to call in on this.
Thank you for calling in the majority
using
report.
Fire
The host will be with you
RTC,
shortly.
ladies and gentlemen. Fire RTC as our way of... I'm going to put Mike back on the line.
Bear with us.
Mike.
Bear with us.
Mike, you there?
4625739.
Mike. 610. Mike. Oh, he's gone. Calling from a 509 area code. Who's this? Where are you calling from? What the heck? We heard somebody before. 509. 509. 509. Oh, we're going to give this one more try before, I don't know what. Calling from a 610.
Calling from a 509 area code. Who's this?
Now, wait a second. Why they can't hear me for some reason?
What the heck?
Hello?
I heard somebody before. 509.
I'm not getting through to the phone.
509.
They can't hear me on the phone.
Give this one more try before, I don't know what. Call from a 610.
Sam?
Yes, can you hear me, Mike? Can you hear
Sam,
me?
do you have me?
Yeah, it's weird. They can't hear me.
Sam, do you hear me?
I'm sorry, folks. I don't know what the problem is here. Check
Sam,
1
do you hear
2.
me?
Check 1 2. I don't know what the problem is. All right, we're gonna have to hold off on the phones. I mean, it's getting into the computer. I'm looking at the levels. I don't know what's happening. Very strange. Very, very strange. We'll get back to the phones hopefully in a second, folks. Let me try this one more time. One last time. Gosh darn it. We don't nearly have the...
Thank you for calling
yes,
in the
I
Majority
know,
Report.
Of course, you're very welcome.
The host will be with you shortly.
Oh, I forgot to ask Anthony for a live streaming thing. All right. I am there. Let's see if we can do this one more time. We lost Mike. Let's try 509 area code. Who's this? Where are you calling from? That is weird. They cannot hear me. I don't know what to tell you.
Sound preferences reads the mic.
The sound preferences are reading the mic, but when I call on either system, people can't hear me when I go in there. I don't know what to say. All right, folks, I'm sorry. There's something wrong with the phone. So I love Sarah Palin. So Roy Moore said God did 9/11 because of homosexuality and abortion. So I'm assuming Hannity and crew are going to cover this with the same vigor they did Jeremiah Wright. Surely blaming America for 9/11 should disqualify you amongst the patriots on the right. Republican voters won't turn on Trump. I remember Rush saying that about Obama, something to the effect of they will throw him overboard to protect the ideology. I don't think you can separate religion from this party. There's not much deviation there. They don't care about policy. The ends justify the means. Bob Flav, my movie recommendation this week, The Cult of Chucky. Chucky movies have been completely overlooked by Oscar. Creamy, dripping things. A few more thoughts on MMT. I can't read this whole thing, but I'll read a couple of sentences. Paul Krugman makes the point on a weekly basis that when aggregate demand is too low, governments can spend a certain amount of money without risk of inflation to overcome the inertia. It's the essence of Keynesian economic theory. Whereas traditional economics suggests that income, GDP, equals consumption, investment, exports, and MMT ignores investment and assumes it to be an unnecessary component, despite the fact that every country that ever existed used such mechanism to account for itself. The basic idea is that there's a new condition, an economic actor, that can demand that it settle all debts in its own paper currency and therefore print money to cover those debts. It becomes truly unaccountable because it can print as much as it wants to spur demand. That is where MMT loses its way. In a technical sense, accounting for investment is a bit of an illusion. All right, I can't read the whole thing. I'm sorry. It's just too long. Dragon Slayer. All I can tell you is that under an MMT philosophy, you cannot have, it's virtually impossible to have monetary inflation. Dragon Slayer. Would Price being fired mean that the ACA will be slightly less maliciously sabotaged? I doubt it, but maybe. Do you stand with in solidarity with your fellow Massachusetts librarian in injecting Melania's Seuss books? I got to check on that, but I would imagine I do. Topher Pattern. I think we're all extremely weary of watching the assault on our government dismantling of progress. I realized yesterday the only way to continue is to let the anger go. It has to be a conscious decision to focus on the long-term goals we have for improving society. We can't distinguish between the fight for progress and the struggle to defend what we have. It's not a burden to defend the DACA and ACA. I'll take one happy warrior over 1,000 burnt-out revolutionaries. Todd Ferguson. Can't read all of this. I largely agree with you on the Kaepernick issue. As a huge football fan, I got to mention that I think you're misrepresenting the NFL and their stance toward him. This comes from a narrative mostly outside of sports circles that regards Kaepernick as a good quarterback, but this just isn't true. Kaepernick was part of the 2012 zone read niche, which took the league by storm, and then similar to the Wildcat in 2008, figured out in off-season. That's why Kaepernick suddenly went from promising superstar to the bottom-barrel starter in less than a year. He has problems progressing past his first read and relies too much on his athleticism. He became easy to defend and couldn't adapt. I get your point, but I think there's you'd be hard-pressed to find any experts who don't think that this guy isn't a valuable backup quarterback.
Yeah, there's certain numbers of metrics that would... I mean, first of all, the crop of current... And I don't follow the NFL as closely as I used to, but my understanding is the crop of NFL starting quarterbacks is terrible this year. And he by certain metrics, he would be in the middle of those, judging by his previous stats, which might be a bit outdated. But he'd at least be a backup.
Turd Ferguson is arguing that Kaepernick's skill set was suitable for a specific trend in offense in the NFL. And he, according to Todd Ferguson, cannot break out of that skill set or that mindset that's involved in that type of offense. And therefore, that's why nobody's picking him up, because even the stats he has were built on a different era in football. And
maybe there are no other quarterbacks that were specifically advantaged by that type of quarterbacking, that zone read or whatever he's saying. I mean, I'd be surprised if, I don't know, maybe that's possible, but I bet you it's I bet you there's an influence of the owners.
Ronnie Reagan, did you have to listen to that bus stop lawyer in Washington and refuse to have Cliff on today? Team Cliff. No. That is not what happened. We had some wires crossed. I mean, we've been talking about a while, you know, to do a cycle. I mean, I keep saying that. And Cliff will be here next week, Friday. New Human. Really like the analysis by Anthony at the end of the interview. Michael asked on TMBS why conservatives can't be funny, and I feel like trying to picture any of them speaking as sincerely as that answers the question. Billy Buckner. Effing loved the President's Show. Saw him on a Broad City episode. Really happy he's a bright, secure, thoughtful person. If Goofy Hack got there first, it would make the show more vulnerable to a takedown. No offense, Sam, but if the show keeps excelling, he's going to be under much brighter light and more powerful microscope. It's comforting to see that he's likely to hold up under the scrutiny and intellectual challenge. The insightful question he tosses into his interview segment is awesome. It was great watching the first few guests throw completely off guard by it. Wait, what do you mean? No offense, Sam.
I don't know, actually.
Wait. What does that mean? Are you saying no offense, Sam, but he's great and you're not great?
He's great at I think maybe this is uncharitable reading, but I think he's saying that if you ever get in a situation where you get brighter lights, you don't have the personality to manage it, maybe?
Okay. So what you're saying is not that, Sam, he's probably going to be much more successful than you, but that if you were to reach his level of success, you might not be able to handle it. Yeah. Okay. Well, I feel much better with that. Thank you. Here's a little tip. If you mean no offense, you generally don't have to preface what you're saying with it. No offense, Billy Bruckner, but I have a feeling Martha Rose, who's up next, has a better I am than you. Hey, Sam, I have $1 million idea. Ask Anthony if you can record backstage video of his show. I wish you talked to him more, but I know he is too busy. Theodore Cuxtable. Have you covered anything on the presidential memorandum to the Secretary of State and Secretary of Treasury regarding the Magnitsky Act? The memorandum was signed 8 September 17, and some of this see this as tying to the Browder testimony with reference to Russian interventions. The thought I've read is that the Secretary of State and secretaries can whitelist certain individuals or institutions and unfreeze assets or grant visas without congressional approval. I think it was also floated as a means for enabling more direct control of North Korea sanctions without congressional approval. Interesting. No, I haven't covered that. Angry. I was struck by the conversation by Michael, Matt, and Mindy that people like the Kochs and Peter Thiel actually want the U.S. to be like Brazil, where people would be poor and the rich would live in gated communities. Don't they realize their families would get kidnapped or they might get lynched or killed in that scenario? Why are they this suicidal? Teacher BB. Have you watched the PBS Vietnam War series? No, I've started a little bit, right? Not really. Two things struck me. Surveys at the time showed majority support for the Guardsmen after Kent and the soldiers after My Lai. It's disturbing how little things have changed.
Rick Perlston goes into that. I mean, you could take that as an example of how things haven't changed, but maybe, I don't know, I feel like that things have changed a bit since then. I don't know if the reaction would be the same as it is today. Maybe I'm wrong.
Let's turn up the phone and just see if it's working now. 509, can you hear me? Well, the good news is I can't hear 509. But maybe he doesn't realize I'm talking to him. It's very strange. Because we could hear Mike, right? And there's no reason why the system would be able to tell me from Mike.
Seems like the type of problem that might just need a system restart.
I don't even know what that means. Historic Larry. Blackjack Leo. I found out the Jones Act waiver is just 10 days, not 1 year. What? In the House, Velazquez suggests 1 year waiver. She is from New York. In the Senate, McCain in July introduced legislation for complete repeal. They just, McCain and Lee just introduced legislation just to permanent waiver for Puerto Rico. We'll see. Hopefully there'll be enough pressure. We were talking about Kaepernick. Here is Fox News pundit and Trump evangelical advisor, Pastor Robert Jeffress, saying that the protests during the national anthem aren't the best way to protest because this guy is apparently an expert at protesting. And here we go. Here's his response. This is the love it or leave it. Fox and Friends are doing a lot of interviews like this now, I notice, where it's a little more cash.
So I'll start with you, Pastor Jeffress, because you're saying that you understand these men they have their arguments or their issues with the country, but you think there's a better way to protest?
That's right. I want to thank the Fox News hosts for stumbling over what they're protesting and then sort of completely glossing it over. They don't say what these men have a problem with the country. They just have a problem with the country. Problem with the country. General problem with the country. Go ahead.
That's right. There is a better way to protest social injustice without disrespecting our country or disrespecting our country's leaders. I mean, for example, a few years ago, you had those Oregon Christian bakers who were almost driven into bankruptcy for practicing their faith. That's injustice. But they didn't respond by calling then President Obama a bum. Or this football coach you all have covered who was fired for voluntarily praying. He didn't respond to that injustice by failing to stand for the national anthem. I think what these players are doing is absolutely wrong. These players ought to be thanking God that they live in a country where they're not only free to earn millions of dollars every year, but they're also free from the worry of being shot in the head for taking a knee like they would be if they were in North Korea.
So if I'm to understand this undoubtedly multimillionaire pastor, they should be thanking God for being getting concussions while they play football, and thanking God for not being shot for taking a knee during the national anthem, but at the same time not appreciating the fact that they can take a knee during the national anthem, so they shouldn't take a knee during the national anthem.
It's really creepy when conservatives get on this beat of you think feminists have something to fight for in America. You could be in Saudi Arabia and get your head cut off or something like that. As if they want to do it. It's almost like a threat, basically. Like, you keep pushing us, this is what we're after.
I mean, one could have said the same thing like, oh, you're a baker and you don't want to serve people? Well, you're lucky you're not in North Korea where you'd get shot in the head if you didn't serve people that the government said you should serve people.
Imagine if Obama said that.
Yeah.
Or
we need Michael to come in with Obama going, yep.
Exactly. Yeah,
shoot him in the head.
Or you could, you don't have to go to North Korea. You could go to our own history.
Right. Exactly. Oh, you're asking God, you're thanking God? How about we stick you in a tub of water and see if you float, if your God is real? How's that? Should be thanking God that we don't put you in a tub of water and see if you float to find out if your God's real. That's what I think.
Should be thanking God we don't establish you as property and make you do exactly what we want.
That's sort of like a catch-all, isn't it? I got to tell. That's what next time Mila complains about anything. That's what I'm going to tell her. Oh, You're mad because I won't let you watch TV? You should be thanking God you're not in North Korea where you get shot in the head for asking to watch TV. Here is Tucker Carlson. Oh, incidentally, Tucker Carlson, who was the publisher of the Daily Caller, he launched that thing. They recently had to take down a video that apparently was deemed anti-Semitic that they had produced.
A little bit.
Yeah, just a little bit. And here he is, Tucker Carlson, fighting the white fight. He's talking about, of course, about the Colin Kaepernick thing. This is a Fox ratings boon.
Problem. So if you have a guy like that on who said something racially inflammatory and untrue, you should push back a little bit when he theorizes about how this is about the plantation mentality on the basis of no evidence. If you're a journalist, you got to say, whoa, can you prove that?
He used an analogy, and using
Pause
an
it.
analogy.
I should tell you that what Tucker Carlson's responding to is Spike Lee saying that Trump is acting like NFL owners are plantation owners. And he's basically telling them, get your slaves in order.
And using an analogy that actually came to the minds of many people in African American communities and in Caucasian communities and in Latino or brown communities.
Right.
When our president, the president of this country, referred to African American citizens, tax-paying citizens who are gainfully employed, making good money in this country in the NFL as professional athletes. When he referred to them in the manner he did as sons of bitches and said that the owners ought to get those sons of bitches out of there. Just drag them out of there. That language makes it seem like these owners have a proprietary interest in the bodies of these African American athletes.
I don't know what
such
school
that
you went
they
to.
can be.
Don't give
I
me
went
that
to Howard
nonsense.
University
Look,
School of
whatever.
Law.
You're
Before that, I went to St. Mary's University.
These are
proud of it. Right.
Look,
He's saying that they should be dragged out of there for a peaceful protest.
me.
The next time they get down on their knees in their peaceful, lawful protest, those SOBs ought to be dragged out of there.
That's his opinion.
Really, as the
and
president of
some
the United
these
States,
guys, hold on,
about another citizen.
Can I slow you down? Can I slow you down in your speech for?
There you go. I love the Tucker Carlson about to say that's his opinion. He's just the president of the United States, as opposed to the opinion that you are harping on from Spike Lee.
Well, his first thing was, can you prove that's a plantation mentality? It's like, how would you go along proving that?
You would, of course, you would take the plantation mentality mapping
to Tucker's
tool.
Yeah, to his satisfaction. Oh, you've proved it to me.
Prove it. That's where Tucker. She didn't prove it.
That's actually his whole approach to like this, him being basically the soft white nationalist broadcast. Prove it.
Prove it. Historic Larry. Love Anthony's show, and I tell everyone around his impression about his impression that for me is so much more important than other famous impressions because all the internal things and small nonverbals he's absolutely nailed. But I do worry for his mental health. We've all heard of the Stanford prison experiment. Anthony is currently running the Trump prison experiment. How long can you play a Trump character before you completely lose yourself? And honestly, that was the big question I had for him. Can I get a show? Oh, Lawyer Dylan. Wow, show's getting a big legal following. Can I get a shofar blast up here? I just passed the Illinois bar exam. I want to thank you all at the Majority Report for getting me through my long summer of studying. Now I'm off to fight fascism as a labor lawyer. Wish me luck. Oh, that is awesome. Congratulations. Just added a labor lawyer to the roles of our listeners. Excited about that. Later, Carity. Wait. Comedy didn't get political till after Hicks' death? I think Hicks proves my point. The guy was barred from Letterman's show. Now look at all those shows. right? I mean, that proves my point. Colbert, Seth Meyers, Jimmy Kimmel.
When did Louis Black start doing stuff?
Well, Louis Black was doing stuff for ages, but I mean, Louis was up in, I knew Louis at that time, and he was political, mixed, but there just wasn't, he didn't get any traction in his career. He's another example. He didn't get any traction in his career until The Daily Show, late in The Daily Show. I'm not saying there weren't any political comedians. Bill Hicks, of course, was. But the fact that it was unacceptable for him to go on Letterman is a prime example of what I'm talking about, how much it's changed. Michael's drinking problem. Great interview and great point by Anthony, not using the character to just make sexist, racist jokes. I enjoy Michael impressions, but they occasionally creep into this territory. He definitely uses Trump to call Sarah Huckabee Sanders ugly. Yeah, I mean, I think there's something about that. I was going to ask Anthony, actually, like, I don't see as much racism as I would like to see from Trump, frankly. And I have, I appreciate that perspective. But I think on some level, and I think we could have had probably a longer conversation about that, because I definitely think you have to be careful. And I definitely think that it might make sense in certain contexts to say, like, we're just not going to go near there because I don't want to ride that line. But I also think that, like, Trump's misogyny, like, okay, here's an example. There was one scene where they had on the show where Trump is supposed to meditate. Deepak Chopra says, meditate. And so he goes into, like, the deep recesses of his mind. And he's hugging this, like, woman who's, like, I don't know, looks like a 25-year-old model or something. Maybe she's like a Miss America thing, or I can't remember. I can't remember it exactly. It was a while back. And then he's hugging her, and then mid-hug, she turns into an old woman. And she goes, I'm your age. I'm your age. And he's just like, ah. And there's, like, the implicit that's telling you something about Trump's nightmare about, like, being with a woman who's not 40 years younger than him or whatnot. But I think you could go further. I do think that, like, I understand that choice and I respect that choice, but comedically, I'm not sure that I would make that choice. And not even just comedically, satirically. I think you need to, it's just a question of how you do it. Jean 603, but that would actually be, if I ever had him back on, that would be, I'm not saying it that way. Like, if I ever did him the favor, whatever it is, Billy Buckner, no offense. But if I ever had him back on this prestigious show, then yeah. Giant 603, talking about Jimmy Dore yesterday, reminded me of during the primary when Cenk Uygur basically said you and Mr. Dore would be the best of friends. I guess he didn't account for Jimmy's idiocy. I don't remember that. A Square. Hello, MR. I've been listening but not able to IM. Spoke with a good friend on the island of Puerto Rico. Things are 10 times worse than described. My friend described it as a war zone. Another Katrina-type response. Disgraceful. 3-hour lines to get in the supermarket. People trying to steal gas from cars. The sick are getting sicker. Food and water. No ETA on power and meals. No ETA on clean running water. I mean, just horrible. Horrible. Yeah, horrible. All right, let me try calling in here.
Thank you for calling in the Majority Report. The host will be with you shortly.
Test. It's not. It's weird. There's something wrong with the phone systems. It's not getting to the it's getting into the computer, but it's not getting to the Skype or to the check one. Check one. Check. Okay, it's getting into the Skype. Let's try this one more time.
Thank you for calling in the Majority Report.
Bear with us,
The
folks.
host will be with you shortly.
Long gone are the days that we've had extended tech problems. Well, not so much. Not long gone. All right, let's try this again. Calling from a 509 area code. 509.
Yeah.
Can you hear me?
111361.
Oh, he doesn't know that we're on. He doesn't know that he's on. That's Ronald Reagan, and he just gave us his PIN.
Yeah. No, 111361. That's my bar number, bitch.
1111. Oh, I see what you're saying. I thought
Oregon State Bar.
So you can hear me.
Yeah.
So apparently, Ronald Reagan is a member of the Oregon Bar. If you want to report him, you now know his ABA number.
That's my Oregon State Bar number. It's public record. Look it up. No disciplinary action. Biatch.
All right, there you go. Is that what you calling him for? He hung up on us. All right, let's go back. 610, Mike, is that you?
It is. Can you hear me now?
No, we could hear you. You couldn't hear us.
Yeah, that was a little weird.
It was
I
weird.
thought my phone had broken or something.
No.
But, yeah, I had this big elaborate rant that I was on.
All right, well,
Way to ruin my vibes.
let's hear it again.
Well, I was just talking about the regulatory firestorm that's going on in all aspects of our government, and people are focused on stuff that doesn't matter, especially this charter flight thing. Meanwhile, they're repealing all the regulations on pilot hours and privatizing air traffic control. And I looked that flight up. It was up in 2009 up in Buffalo, where it crashed into a house and killed 50 people because the pilots didn't know how to respond to really
I mean,
common.
look, here is the reality is that the regulatory stuff does not get people jazzed. This petty corruption stuff does. And
I know.
And I mean, it's sad, but true. It's sad, but true. But it has been my experience that this stuff, as meaningless as it is in the great scheme of things, fits into the sort of the preconceived notions that people have of, drain the swamp, that type of crap. And
well, they just raised $85 billion to spend on the Pentagon, where they were spending $700 billion. So we're talking about 10,000 of these things wouldn't even make a dent.
No, it's supposed to be indicative of an attitude.
No one talks about that.
It's supposed to be indicative of an attitude. And look, the bottom line is that I would be more upset about it, but I appreciate, and I don't, it's hard to find those stories that you're talking about. To be honest with you, I hadn't seen.
Well, there's another one. As the hurricane was hitting Puerto Rico from climate change, it was a Category 5 until about right before it hit, when it was 1 mile an hour below the highest category hurricane. The Trump administration just put massive tariffs on imported solar panels September 22nd. I don't know if anybody's noticed that, but there was an a trade commission, Trump appointees just putting big tariffs on
on Chinese solar panels.
Yeah, because and
China.
the funny thing is, reading more into it, the company that sued is actually owned by Chinese owners. It's nominally in America. That's just the American arm. So it's really just Chinese people that own this company suing other Chinese manufacturers, so that their panels have an advantage.
Right.
And The one glowing thing from Obama is we invested in alternative energy, and the market actually caught up, and so it was starting to make economic sense to use solar and wind over fossil fuels. And Trump's going to come in, and this is a major economic shift. You know, this is not something that people are going to talk about, but it's going to change our carbon footprint, the way that our entire trajectory on whether or not the planet gets roasted. And, you know, it's not even talked about. I mean, I can't even find, I think I found the article because it caught my eye because the headline was "Big Win for America First." And I was like, what the fuck is this? And I read into it, and it was, oh, we're now putting tariffs on imported solar panels.
The only thing, the first thing that I can see is oilprice.com. Trump's solar tariff confusion creates an opportunity. That bothers me on oilprice.com.
Yeah. I try to keep my ears to the ground on this regulatory stuff because, you know, going to law school and having the training, I can sift through it, but there's just so many things happening in so many different areas.
I know.
You know, people believe like, oh, they failed on healthcare, so they're failing. And it's like, no.
Well, no, there's
Like
I mean, that's the
Supreme
thing.
Court
There's a whole host of things that is going to be problematic. I mean, yesterday I talked about the Janus case that is going to come up in front of the Supreme Court, and we're going to see the destruction of public sector unions.
Oh my God.
I mean, and
that really scares me. Like, legit, as someone who does Democratic campaigns, I don't even know what's gonna. I'm scared. Like, legitimately, I don't. Like, they already have a 2-to-1 money advantage. This is probably about 60% of our funding for the Democratic Party and the 60% of the organizing energy. I mean, I don't even know how we continue. And
it's a problem.
So, I mean, I know I'm doom and glooming, but Jesus, it's bad. And, you know, I just looked at Obama's approval rating from 4 years ago and compared it to Trump's approval rating today, and it's the same, 41%. He's not, I mean, he's totally within the bounds of a normal approval rating, and he could easily swing back.
Yep.
The idea that 2018 is just going to happen is totally false. We need to, like, get pissed about this stuff.
Well, we're going to have this debate.
How mad are people?
Yeah, I mean, I think, like, you know, like I was saying with Digby, I get the real sense that there's like been a significant percentage of people who were heavily engaged in March who have checked out. I don't think it's like
I don't blame them.
70%. It's exhausting, and I think, you know,
fatiguing.
The people who are sticking with this are, you know, in many ways, more committed to politics and had been there. And the question is, you know, how do you get them back in some ways? So, all right, appreciate the call.
We got to give them something to care for.
Yeah, no,
right.
I agree.
All right, see you, Sam. Yeah.
I agree. All right, we'll talk to you soon. Thank you, Mike.
Good to see you. Bye-bye.
All right, we'll take one more phone call and then a couple IMs, and we'll go. This guy's been holding for a long time, or gal. Calling from a 203 area code. Who's this?
It's a guy or gal. My name's Jay.
Jay.
From New Haven.
From New Haven, Connecticut.
Listen, I took your taunting seriously, so me and my crew, we did go up to Worcester last night, and we were looking to engage. So it didn't take long because, you know, we look like pretty heavy guys when we pull into town, and after a short amount of time, the hard guys of Worcester showed up. We knew they were the hard guys because they were on hoverboards, basically. They pulled in on those rechargeable hoverboards, and we laid into them. We sprayed them with super soakers, and that stuff, it shorted out all the hoverboards, every one of them. And these guys, they don't know what to do. You think they would know how to, like, run after us? No. Because they only know how to ride hoverboards. So, like, they're kind of, like, banging their hoverboards on the ground, and we make a hasty exit, and we're on the Mass Pike within an hour. Now, so we made very short. Now, I got to wonder, it's not that they're super bad up there. There's a reason you left the town, and it wasn't obviously to find your success, because otherwise you would have ended up back in Worcester already. What's happening is there's something... These people, you're scared of these people up there.
Well, to be honest with you, I'm really not good on a hoverboard. And I don't have the sense of balance that's needed.
But before they had hoverboards, what did they do up there?
It was mechanized skateboards.
Yeah, this is where it's breaking down. There's something else that happened. We don't know about your youth up there, and you've been covering it up. And I think over time we're going to chisel away at this and find out what really happened in your hometown.
Yeah, maybe you will. Maybe you will, Jay. Or maybe...
Well, Matt...
You
Matt,
won't.
Matt,
Good day,
Matt,
sir.
I think might pull...
Good day, sir. Maybe you'll find out, and maybe you won't. All right, we're going to do 5 more... Oh, wait. We should play this. Now, look, there's no sound to this. But it's short, and it's worth it. It is... Did this come from Harry Shearer? Yep. So Harry Shearer has this big, old satellite dish. A big one. Big one. And he gets the feeds, the coastal feeds for the networks. So they send these feeds, New York to L.A. And what happens is the feed is the internal feed. So this is, and when I go up to MSNBC, like there are TVs where I can just watch the host, period. And you don't even hear or see any of the other people talking to him. And this camera is the feed that goes out through NBC and to affiliates, or I should say probably out to Burbank. And then they roll in commercials or whatnot. This is a feed of Sean Hannity as the SOT. The SOT is an SOT, and it's... I can't remember what it stands for. It's basically like a picture that rolls in with sound. And so he's off mic during this time. He knows he's got like 40 seconds or 30 seconds, and he hangs out and, waits for the camera to come back on him. And in this instance, it turns out that Hannity is, he's got like a little vape that he's got hanging out in his set. Here he is.
Watch this.
So he cuts to the video, and he just looks at the screen. He realizes he got a little time. He goes through his papers. And then he grabs his vape, puts it in his mouth. He's got that real see? I'm going to take that, see? It's got to be a vape. It can't be a cigarette where he's doing that, grabbing the embers. Takes a little drink of water. And this is my favorite part about this video, where it's just like the way he preps himself to come back. He's got something going on his back, his neck there. And then he just looks. He's got that's his, I like that Barney Rubble look he's got at the end there. Like, I'm ready to come back. Picture.
I support that.
No, it's...
in between cuts. I mean, I don't support much else he does, but...
At least he's not smoking in the studio.
I wonder if Grover Norquist hooked him up with that vape.
Oh, is Norquist a big vapor?
Norquist is maybe the biggest vape lobbyist. On top of the taxing, his second issue is vaporizers.
Wow. Had no idea. All right, 5 more IMs. Contagious chameleon. Mental health is what Zappa was talking about as a huge problem. Speaking of getting out of cults, don't you have a guest who escaped a cult and runs a blog now? Maybe we should listen more to Leah Remini in her assault on Scientology. That pastor on Fox is also promoting individualism. You're rich. Shouldn't care what happens to other people because you made it. It's true. Local milk person. Sam, I can rarely listen live, so I know this is a bit dated, but being from like a whole 4 days ago, but it's been on my mind. I have a weird theory. I haven't heard, maybe because it's obvious or unimportant, but Trump was successfully trying to sell the see-through wall idea at that rally. It's a really weird idea to push so aggressively, even for him, since there's no one to pander to with a see-through wall. He's trying hard to convince them that the wall needs to be see-through, that it must be for a reason. So I'll just say they consider his call with the Mexican president when he said it was basically just pandering. His recent deal with the Dems for border security and his claim that the wall was being renovated, even though it doesn't exist yet. It appears he's going to try and pass off a border fence as a see-through wall. That is an interesting theory. He may be setting up. I mean, Can you imagine, like, his perspective on his followers where he's, like, prepping them this far down the road? What I'm going to do is I'm going to say to them, see-through wall. And then we're going to look at different models of a see-through wall.
Yeah.
And then we're going to determine, you know what? The best see-through wall, it's a big, beautiful, actually chain-link fence. Like a double fence, not a single fence, like a double or triple fence.
He knows if he treats it like House Hunters, the wall edition, then people will be completely on board, regardless if it ends up being like a picket fence across the entire thing. Because I think just deep down, he knows his voters are basically only ever feel empowered when they're like buying something,
right,
in like a showroom or something. So I think that's why he keeps playing up this. Oh, we're gonna check out 4 different kinds because like that's what people want.
We're going to judge which is best. We have the plexiglass wall, which is good, but the problem is that the sun comes up and it burns people up to death. It burns people up to death. And the problem is because Mexico is south of us, in the summers it's going to burn Americans. It's going to burn Americans. So we had that one. We had the cement wall with the holes, which is good, but not good enough because you can't follow the complete trajectory of the bag of drugs that come across. We have the rubber one, but it's too hot. It's too hot. It doesn't work. We have this like a slime wall. It's like a really more of a mound. And then we have the chain link wall. Chain link wall, not fence, wall. It's made out of chain links. Wall chain links. Chwa links is what we call it. And that's the best. I actually think that's a great theory, that I'm going to take local milk person and pretend it is mine. Ear. New talking point for the Democrats on the estate tax. Do you really want Chelsea Clinton inheriting all those ill-gotten profits from the Clinton Foundation and Wall Street speaking fees? I like that. Oh, we got time for a couple more. Anthony from Baltimore. With Reagan's suggestion of an aggressive phase-out of Cliff being enacted, it's not being enacted. I'm sorry. I thought I would also make a suggestion. Granted, I realize I don't have anywhere than out of MR Capital as Ronald Reagan. Came across the DNC operative Sam Seder Twitter page, and I saw that he used to rock the solo mustache. I think MR needs a rebranding in which Sam dons a V-neck T-shirt and blazer combi, grows out just the stash, and makes 30-minute videos about the age of consent and free speech. Highly profitable model. That would be funny if I just took like 2 months to just do that. Ryan Tennant. I loathe Ben Sass, but I really hope you saw him telling brown shirt pajama boy Nazi Richard Spencer to get a real job, clown, on Twitter. Kaepernick was fine on a really terrible 49ers team just last year. Even if you want to argue he's not starting caliber anymore, there are definitely not 96 people on earth who are better quarterbacks than him. Coal Addict. No Matthew film guy? Here's my Netflix recommendation. Designated Survivor. No. You'd need PlayStation 4, though. It's exclusive. Oh, Zero Dawn. Horizon Zero Dawn for Mila. No, I don't think so. I'm now convinced your IMs are coming in a LIFO queue. If you don't get to my previous IM during the show, please look for it after. I don't know what a LIFO queue is. Ignatius Riley. I just wish Michael were here to ridicule Sam and Com's failure. Not Safe to Drink series recommendation, The Confession Tapes. It's a documentary that shows the deceptive way that trained interrogators get false confessions in people who are currently in prison for crimes they clearly didn't commit. It's an hour each. It's not kid-friendly as they show real photos of dead bodies. Oh, that's fascinating. Confession Tapes. Man, I got to take just like a month off just to catch up on stuff. I tried reading that 2140 book. I got like 80 pages in, and then it's like life took over. I don't have time to read. Producer Lauren, so much for last week's technical day. See what happens when you don't offer Kelly a raise? Booyah! Jay Chavone. Bill Buckley was all he frustrated. The Soviets had free reign to commit any human rights violation while he was obliged to play by the rules of a free country. I guess that's why the Russians won the Cold War. I called yesterday to drag Mary Haberman for her pissy reply to Nate Silver asking her to take responsibility for objectively bad reporting. Moments later, she tweeted, "One thing Trump dislikes is waste." And yesterday, she compared Trump's ineffectual response to Puerto Rico disaster with de Blasio's slow response to a blizzard. What? Very dangerous to have a reporter at such an elevated newspaper trading her dignity for access that she needs to write a book that will profit her greatly. Yeah, I'll say. Reba. Friday movie. Rugrats Passover. God, I loved 90s Nickelodeon. Twisted Cozy. Today's the 76th anniversary of Babi Yar, the Nazi massacre of nearly all of Kiev's Jews and all over 100,000 others. Oy. Rachel and Justice. Question for Matt. When working Michael's board, what is your beer of choice, Budweiser or America?
Whatever whoever's buying buys, basically.
Maybe we need to have a special place for you to keep that beer, not on the board.
Oh yeah, I'll stop. It looks good right on the LCD panel.
Mr. Mugabe, Mr. Trump told me with the nationalism comedy, Rocket Man is gold, but his neo-colonialism in Puerto Rico is too much. He has since blocked me on Twitter. So, Sam, can you get Nelson to forward a message to Mr. Trump? I have formed a Ministry of Good News and appointed General Kofefe. I hope many good things. And the final I am of the week. Chicago Dom. Sam, on Kaepernick, the analysis is at worst. He is better than every backup than one based on his stats from last year. Would love to hear Dave Zirin talk about this. He's been on it for a year. Conservatives are bad at comedy because you can't critique something you don't understand. They know almost nothing about almost everything. All right, folks. See you next week.
It might take all the strength I got to get to where I want, but I know somehow I'm gonna get there. I wasn't looking when I just got caught between the truth and the light bar, but finding out won't make me feel any better. Yeah, I know the clock is ticking, but the meds are gonna kick in, and my pilot light shining bright. I get somewhere the choice was made, for the option where you don't get paid, for the road that bends before it finally breaks you. I guess somehow I lost my drive between the 101 and the 5. Do you know how far the detour takes you? Yeah, I know